The night was meant to be perfect, and from the outside, it truly looked that way. The engagement party was held at a lakeside venue just outside a small town in Washington state, a place known for soft sunsets and quiet beauty. Strings of warm lights were wrapped around wooden beams, casting a golden glow over the lawn where guests laughed, talked, and raised glasses in celebration. Emma Carter stood near the center of it all, smiling, greeting friends, thanking relatives, and pretending that her heart felt as calm as her face looked. She wore a simple blue dress, elegant but modest, and the engagement ring on her finger caught the light every time she moved her hand. Everyone kept telling her how lucky she was, how happy she must be, how perfect she and Daniel Brooks were together. Daniel stood a few steps away, talking with his coworkers, relaxed and confident, the kind of man who made people feel safe just by being near him. He was kind, steady, and thoughtful, and Emma knew that on paper, he was everything she was supposed to want. They had met 3 years ago through mutual friends in Seattle, built a comfortable relationship, and slowly planned a future that made sense. A house, shared holidays, quiet mornings, a life without chaos. This party was a symbol of that future, a public promise that they were choosing each other. Yet, as Emma smiled and nodded through conversations, she felt a strange tightness in her chest, like her heart was trying to warn her of something she didn't want to hear. It wasn't fear exactly, and it wasn't regret either. It was more like unfinished business lingering in the air, waiting for the right moment to show itself. She told herself she was just overwhelmed, that big moments often felt heavy before they felt joyful. She took a slow breath and turned toward the drinks table, hoping a moment alone would help settle her thoughts. That was when she saw him. Liam Foster stood near the edge of the crowd, holding a glass of soda, dressed neatly but casually, as if he hadn't planned to stay long. For a second, Emma thought her mind was playing tricks on her. Liam wasn't supposed to be here. He belonged to a different chapter of her life, one she believed she had already closed. But there he was, older, calmer, familiar in a way that felt both comforting and dangerous. Liam was her first real love, the man she had dated through her mid-20s, the one she had imagined marrying before life pulled them in different directions. Their relationship had ended 2 years ago, not because of betrayal or anger, but because of timing, distance, and fears neither of them knew how to face. They had promised to stay friendly, then slowly stopped talking altogether. Emma hadn't seen him in over a year. Her heart skipped, then sank, then raced again, all within seconds. She looked away quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed her staring, but deep down she knew it was too late. Some connections didn't fade quietly. They waited. She tried to focus on the voices around her, on the music, on the clinking of glasses, but her attention kept drifting back to the edge of the crowd. She wondered who had invited him. Maybe a mutual friend. Maybe coincidence. Or maybe fate had a cruel sense of timing. Daniel walked over and wrapped an arm gently around her waist, kissing her cheek. "You okay?" he asked, smiling. Emma nodded, forcing another smile. "Just taking it all in," she said. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. As Daniel was pulled back into another conversation, Emma felt the distance between her and Liam shrink, even though they hadn't moved. She could sense his presence, like a memory that refused to stay quiet. Liam finally looked directly at her, and their eyes met. There was no shock on his face, only a soft, unreadable expression, a mix of surprise and something deeper. He gave a small nod, polite and restrained. Emma returned it, her pulse quickening. In that brief exchange, years of shared moments seemed to rise to the surface, late-night talks, road trips, laughter, arguments, dreams they once spoke aloud. She felt a sudden urge to escape the noise, the expectations, the weight of the ring on her finger. She told herself she wouldn't talk to him. She didn't owe him anything. Her life had moved on. Still, her feet carried her toward the edge of the lawn, toward the quieter space near the venue's side path. She told herself she just needed air. The evening breeze was cool against her skin, and for a moment, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply, trying to steady herself. Behind her, footsteps approached. She didn't turn around right away, but she already knew who it was. "Hi, Emma," Liam said gently. Hearing her name in his voice felt like stepping into an old song she hadn't heard in years but still knew by heart. She turned to face him, keeping her posture composed. "Hi, Liam," she replied. They stood a few feet apart, both careful, both aware of the invisible line between past and present. "Congratulations," he said after a pause. "It looks like a beautiful night." Emma nodded. "Thank you. I didn't know you'd be here." He gave a small, honest smile. "Neither did I, until this morning. I almost didn't come." There was something unsaid in his tone, something that made Emma's throat tighten. She wanted to ask why he came. She wanted to ask why seeing him felt like this. But she didn't. Instead, she glanced back toward the lights and laughter behind them, the life she was supposed to be celebrating. "I should get back," she said softly, even though she didn't move. Liam nodded, understanding more than she said. "Of course," he replied. Neither of them walked away. The silence stretched, filled with the sound of distant music and the quiet pull of memories. In that moment, Emma felt the first crack form in the perfect night, a subtle shift she couldn't undo. She didn't know it yet, but this brief meeting, this simple exchange of words and glances, was the beginning of a choice she hadn't realized she was still capable of making. And as she finally turned back toward the party, her heart carried a question that refused to stay silent, promising that the night was far from over. The noise of the party faded as Emma stepped farther from the lights, the ground crunching softly beneath her shoes as she followed the narrow path behind the venue, telling herself she only needed a minute to clear her head, yet knowing deep down that she was running towards something she should avoid. The cool night air wrapped around her, calmer than the warmth inside, and she leaned against the wooden fence, closing her eyes as if that could slow her thoughts, but before she could steady herself, she heard footsteps again, and this time she didn't pretend not to know who it was. Liam stopped a few feet away, careful not to crowd her, his presence familiar in a way that felt both safe and risky, and for a moment neither of them spoke, as if words might break something fragile. "I didn't mean to corner you," Liam said quietly, his voice low and respectful. "I just thought we should talk, even for a second." Emma nodded without looking at him, staring at the dark trees beyond the fence. "I know," she said, her voice controlled but thin. "I was just overwhelmed." He let out a small breath, like he understood more than she was saying. They talked slowly at first, choosing simple topics: how long it had been, how strange it felt to see each other like this, how life had turned out differently than they once imagined. Liam told her he'd moved back to the area for work, that he hadn't expected to run into her again, especially not like this, and Emma told him she was happy where she was, that Daniel was good to her, that things were stable. The words sounded right, but they didn't fully match the feeling in her chest. The space between them felt heavy with things they never said when they were together, mistakes made by staying quiet too long. Liam admitted he had thought about her more than he should have, especially when things felt lonely, and Emma felt a sharp mix of guilt and honesty rise in her throat because she had done the same, even while building a new life. She told him she never hated him, that leaving had been painful, and Liam replied that watching her walk away had been one of the hardest things he'd ever done. The conversation moved faster then, emotions surfacing without warning, the past spilling into the present as if time had folded in on itself. They spoke about the choices they made, the fear of committing too young, the pressure to have everything figured out, and how love sometimes faded not because it was weak, but because life pulled too hard. Emma felt tears sting her eyes, not because she wanted to be with Liam again, but because a part of her had never fully healed. Liam stepped closer without touching her, his voice softer. "I'm not here to ruin anything," he said, "I just needed you to know that what we had mattered." Emma finally looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the sincerity in his eyes, the same honesty that once made her fall for him. Her heart pounded, and in that charged silence, emotions overtook reason. She reached out without thinking, her hand brushing his arm, a simple touch that carried years of history. Liam froze for a second, then gently placed his hand over hers, not pulling her closer, just holding still, as if giving her the chance to stop. She didn't. The kiss that followed was brief and emotional, more about memory than desire, a soft collision of longing and regret rather than passion. It lasted only seconds, but it felt heavy, like a door opening that should have stayed closed. Emma pulled back first, her breath uneven, her mind racing with the weight of what she'd done. "This can't happen," she said quickly, stepping away, her voice shaking now. Liam nodded, his face serious, regret clear in his expression. "I know," he replied, "I'm sorry." The moment ended as quickly as it began, leaving behind a sharp silence that felt louder than the music inside. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, guilt flooding in as reality rushed back. She thought of Daniel, of his trust, of the life they were planning, and shame settled heavy in her chest. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward the venue, her steps fast and unsteady, desperate to return to normal, to pretend the last few minutes hadn't happened. She didn't see Daniel standing near the side of the building, having stepped out to look for her, his face frozen as he watched her disappear inside, the truth sinking in before she ever realized he was there. As Emma rejoined the party, forcing a smile and answering questions she barely heard, the lights seemed harsher, the laughter distant, and the ring on her finger felt heavier than ever. She kept telling herself it was over, that it was a mistake she could bury, but deep down she felt the shift, the invisible line she had crossed, knowing that some moments, no matter how brief, change everything that comes after. The party ended without drama on the surface, but beneath the polite goodbyes and soft music fading into silence, everything had already changed, and Emma felt at the moment the last guest left and the staff began clearing empty glasses from the tables. Daniel grew quiet in a way she had never seen before, not angry or loud, but distant, as if he had stepped back into himself and closed a door she couldn't reach. He offered to help clean up, moving with calm purpose, and Emma followed him, her heart pounding, her mind racing for the right words, but none of them felt strong enough to carry the truth. When they finally got into the car, the silence pressed down hard, and the drive home felt longer than usual, every streetlight flashing like a warning she ignored. Inside the apartment, Daniel took off his jacket slowly, placed his keys on the counter, and stood still for a moment before turning to face her. His eyes were steady but tired, filled with a hurt that made Emma's chest tighten. "I saw you," he said, his voice quiet and controlled, not accusing, just honest. Emma felt the blood drain from her face as she realized there was no space left for denial. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then finally nodded. "I'm so sorry," she said, the words coming out fast, fragile. "It wasn't planned. It didn't mean what it looked like. I didn't want to hurt you." Daniel listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, his hands resting on the counter as if grounding himself. "I didn't follow you," he continued, "I stepped outside to check on you, and I saw enough." He paused, swallowing hard. "I trusted you, Emma. Tonight was about us." She rushed to explain, telling him about Liam showing up unexpectedly, about old feelings she didn't expect to resurface, about how confused she felt in that moment, insisting that she loved Daniel and chose him, that the kiss was a mistake she regretted deeply. Her voice shook as she spoke, tears falling freely now, not to manipulate but because the weight of her actions finally settled fully on her heart. Daniel let her finish, then took a deep breath. "I believe you didn't plan it," he said slowly, "but I can't ignore what it tells me." He looked at the ring on her finger, then back at her face. "If a part of you could still go there, even for a moment, then something between us wasn't as solid as I thought." Emma shook her head, stepping closer, desperate. "That's not true. I was overwhelmed. I was scared. It doesn't mean I don't want this life with you." Daniel stepped back gently, not harshly, but firmly enough to stop her. "I don't want a future where I'm wondering if I'm enough," he said, his voice breaking just slightly. "I don't want to build a marriage on doubt." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Emma felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her, leaving her suspended in a moment she couldn't escape. She pleaded, apologized again, promised to do anything to rebuild his trust, but Daniel shook his head, pain etched across his face. "I don't think trust works that way," he replied. "Once it cracks, you hear it every time things get quiet." He picked up the small box from the counter where they had placed cards earlier that evening and opened it, revealing the engagement ring's case. "I think we need to stop this now," he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "Before it turns into something worse." Emma's knees felt weak as she slipped the ring off her finger, her hands trembling as she placed it back into the box, the soft click of it closing sounding louder than any argument. She wanted to scream, to beg, to rewind the night and make different choices, but time didn't move backward, and love didn't always survive good intentions. Daniel picked up his jacket again, telling her he would stay with a friend for a few days to give them both space, and when he walked out the door, the apartment felt suddenly too large, too quiet, filled with the echoes of a future that no longer existed. Emma sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, grief and guilt twisting together inside her chest, realizing that losing Daniel wasn't just about the kiss, but about what it revealed, a truth she had avoided until it stood in front of her without mercy. Later that night, her phone buzzed with a message from Liam, short and apologetic, saying he never meant to cause harm, that he hoped she would be okay, and Emma stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone down without replying. For the first time, she felt completely alone, stripped of certainty, forced to face the consequences of her actions without comfort or distraction. As dawn approached, the city outside slowly waking, Emma sat in the quiet and understood that the engagement didn't end because of one moment, but because that moment exposed something unfinished inside her, something she hadn't been brave enough to face before promising forever. The days after the breakup passed quickly yet felt heavy, each hour reminding Emma that the life she had imagined was gone, not with noise or anger, but with a quiet finality that left no room for denial. Daniel kept his distance, respectful and firm, and that somehow hurt more than harsh words would have, because it showed he had already accepted the end while she was still learning how to breathe in the space it left behind. Emma moved through her routine on autopilot, answering messages from friends with short replies, returning gifts with careful hands, and avoiding places that reminded her of plans that would never happen. The apartment felt different without Daniel's presence, not empty exactly, but unfamiliar, like a room rearranged overnight. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Emma opened the small box that held the engagement ring and stared at it for a long time, not with longing, but with clarity, understanding that what she lost wasn't just a relationship, but the version of herself who believed stability alone was enough. Liam didn't reach out again, and she was grateful for that, because his silence gave her space to think without pressure or confusion. She realized the kiss wasn't about choosing between two men, but about confronting feelings she had buried to move forward too quickly, afraid of uncertainty, afraid of standing still. Over time, the guilt softened into reflection, and the heartbreak turned into something quieter, something that asked her to grow instead of collapse. Emma began walking in the mornings, letting fresh air clear her thoughts, and during those walks she admitted truths she had avoided, that she loved Daniel for his kindness, but never fully let herself ask whether she was ready for the forever she agreed to. She didn't blame herself endlessly, nor did she excuse her actions. Instead, she learned to sit with them, to accept responsibility without destroying her sense of worth. One afternoon, she met Daniel briefly to return a few remaining items, and the exchange was calm, respectful, and sad in a gentle way, the kind of sadness that comes from understanding rather than anger. He wished her well, and she meant it when she said the same, realizing that love doesn't always end because it was false, but because it wasn't aligned. Weeks later, Emma packed the ring away in a drawer, not as a reminder of failure, but as a chapter closed, and for the first time since that night, she felt something close to peace. She didn't know what the future would bring, whether Liam would ever re-enter her life or whether someone entirely new would, but she knew she would no longer ignore the quiet questions inside her heart. Standing alone on her balcony one evening, watching the city lights flicker on, Emma understood that sometimes losing everything familiar is what teaches a person to finally listen to themselves. The pain didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled her, and in its place grew a sense of honesty she hadn't known before. She wasn't healed completely, and she wasn't certain about love, but she was awake, grounded, and willing to move forward without pretending. And as the night settled around her, Emma realized that while the story she planned had ended, a truer one had just begun, shaped not by fear or expectation, but by the courage to face unfinished feelings and choose herself with clarity at last.